Hi, good night, everybody, and welcome to the second night of the Black Box Talks for Caribbean Linked 6. And Caribbean Linked is a residency program that has been happening since 2012 that brings together artists from the English, Spanish, French, and Dutch-speaking Caribbean to come and live together, work together, and put on an exhibition at the end of our 3 weeks. After bonding and loving one another throughout the region. And another important part of these residencies is the Black Box Talks, because it allows not only our participants to get to know one another, but for people around the region to also see what's happening in the contemporary art space in a region that is very rich with culture. So tonight, I would like to begin by introducing our first speaker, who is from the local contemporary art space in Aruba, curator and art historian Ana Maria Hernandez. And she specializes in the field of contemporary art from Latin America and the Caribbean, and has recently been working with Casa de Cultura here in Aruba to curate a series of exhibitions, the last of which we were very privileged to see yesterday by Laura de Vogel, an Aruban artist and also a former resident of Caribbean Linked. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ana Maria Hernandez.
Good evening, everybody. As you already beautifully introduced me, my name is Ana Maria Hernandez. I am an art historian, cultural manager, and independent curator based in Aruba. And I was indeed invited tonight to tell you more about a series of exhibitions I had the pleasure of curating for Casa de Cultura. The series was called Aruba Exhibits 2021-2022. And the idea was to showcase in these 5 exhibitions local contemporary artists. These exhibitions were developed with the support of Prins Bernhard Cultuurfonds Caribisch Gebied and Mondrian Funds. It's 5 exhibitions, and unfortunately, even though I tried really hard, I will only be able to talk about 3. Otherwise, we would be here for hours. But before we get to the exhibitions, I wanted to talk a bit about the space so you guys know what we had to work with. So Casa di Cultura has this multifunctional space available where they have organized exhibitions before, but usually they really try to keep the space flexible in order to host other events of other activities while the exhibitions were taking place. So one of the first things that we agreed on when I was invited was to really keep the space specifically for the exhibition so we can make the best use of the space. We're talking about a space of around 17 by 10 meters. It's very straightforward. But the protagonist of the space was and still is the floor. That makes it very difficult organize exhibitions that are more flexible and dynamic. As you can see in this mock-up, what's white is supposed to be some paintings, just so you guys have an idea of what it looked like. But it used to have a grayish, bluish tone to the walls, which for me just accentuated the floor, so it made it easy. So the second thing that we agreed on was to change the colors. And I wanted to move away from the traditional white walls because, yes, they're more flexible. But for me, I was looking for an intimate and warm environment. So the experience of the space was a bit more immersive. And we succeeded in changing the color, which you will see in the installation shots later on of the exhibitions. But we went with a brownish tone that actually helped us make the floor a bit less loud and the space a bit more cohesive. Quickly about the selection of the artists. So I was invited summer of 2020 to develop the concept for 5 exhibitions in less than a month. So that was really, really rough. So because they or the application for the funding. So what we did to do was to use a list of artists that had already approached Casa di Cultura before with the interest of using the space for exhibitions. And we used this as the basis. And something that I was really interested in developing with the series was to really create or show the wide range of mediums that compose what we understand as contemporary art. So I really wanted to use photography and video and painting. So that was something that I really kept at the foreground when we made the final selection. And for the application, actually, we selected 7 artists. But when we got the green light around a year later, unfortunately, one of the artists couldn't participate anymore, which was a pity. But at the same time, this person was we had approached this artist for a solo exhibition. So we ended up with an opportunity of actually expanding the program and invited 1 extra artist. So in the end, instead of 7 artists, we actually managed to invite 8, which was really nice. Just to give you an overview of the artists that we worked with, for the first exhibition, we invited Velvet Zoe Ramos, who was also a participant in Caribbean Linked, I think in 2018, around that time. The second exhibition was a group exhibition where we invited Antoine Bowers, Cado Delanoy, and Rafael Barragan. For the third exhibition, which was the solo exhibition, which we managed to change into a duo show. For this one, we and Olga Gabriel. The fourth exhibition, how do I present it? I'm not allowed to say if it's a person or people, so we're just call it a creative entity called Cream of Wu, who intervened the space as well with their works. And finally, of course, Laura de Vogo was our 5th and last exhibition, which, as you mentioned, you luckily managed to visit before we dismantled it. All right, so our first exhibition took place last year in September. I think it stayed until November, if I'm not mistaken. This was a solo show by Velvet Zoe Ramos, and we entitled it Affect Through Distance. So Velvet is an interdisciplinary artist who is a lot on how we relate to ourselves and to others through mechanisms such as empathy and memory and how we construct narratives. And she does this through, many, many mediums. So it was very important for me to be able to showcase this wide range of the artists in this exhibition. And she had approached Casa di Cultura before to do actually a retrospective. So that was also a nice indicative of how we were going to select the works. So we would show this wide range of mediums, but also different points in her career to show the development in a specific theme. And as I already mentioned, she's really working with these mechanisms of how we relate to each other and ourselves, and most topics of how we relate to the suffering of others, which I thought it was very interesting because it's a tricky topic. You really need to know how to ethically approach it, so you can actually explore what it is that the artist wants to explore. And I think Velvet does it beautifully. And also through the works that we selected, we managed to show this shift and this search for her of how to do this best. So this is a snapshot of Velvet. And here you see the floor plan of the exhibition with the opening or the entrance at the bottom. So we ended up selecting 7 works, what you're looking at. So this is a shot from the entrance of the space, looking at the back, and to your left, you will see the many that I'm going to show you guys in more detail in a second. This is a shot of the back looking to the opening. So on one side, you see a series of prints, and on the black box where we showcased a video work called Profecia Riba Sulomba, which is a beautiful work that's also homage to her grandmother and her childhood. And then this is a shot of some of the prints of the series called Lovely Ignorance. They were originally etchings, but because of the fragility of the material, we decided to go for a high resolution copies, which worked very, very well. And here you are looking at an installation / performance called The Banquet. And it's basically a tailor-made table, which we covered with rice. And we put some pans and pots with etchings and interventions of the artists. Unfortunately, I'm not gonna talk a lot about these that I fell in love with. So it's called What Many, and this is actually the second version because the first one was done for an exhibition here in Atelier, but at the space allowed her bigger scale. So I actually wanted to show you a little video. Yes, because I think it gives you a better idea of what it looked like. So it's basically plates made out of bread that she hung from the ceiling at different heights. This work is a reference to the impact of COVID on our community. And the title is a reference to a news article that was called What Many Don't See, What Many Don't Know. So during COVID, for example, here in Aruba, we were constantly hearing this idea that, you know, we're all in this together and that we're all go through it and come out of it as a whole, as a unity, as a community. But in reality, of course, not everybody had the same access to, you know, the resources. So these plates really lack this kind of lack of unity, or this idea that we're all supposed to be supported, because there is a insinuation of a table that is never there, right? So these plates are kind of falling, trusting that something will catch them, but they don't. And also the that, you know, created this fragility actually throughout the exhibition. The plates started to fall apart, as you kind of see from this image. And then at both ends, you see 2 chairs. So the first chair, it's covered by revealed roots, right? So if you see this on the street or in a garden, you know that this plant is not going to make it. So it's really, it really reveals the vulnerability of this being, of this entity. And for her, this was a reference in a way to how the situation of the pandemic really showed us how fragile we are, and how, you know, it doesn't matter how strong or well-rooted you think you are, something like this completely, you know, opens you up and a very vulnerable position. So on that side, it's a bit the pessimistic kind of view of the pandemic. But then on the other hand, you see, on the other side, sorry, you see a chair with something in it. And actually, what she put in the chair was a sweet potato, because I didn't know these sweet potatoes are the most resistant thing that ever exists. So you just have to plant it, and it doesn't really need a lot of water or care, it just grows. So for her, this was kind of this signal of, there is still hope. You just have to kind of, work on it, or let certain things run their course as an individual, not really like as a community. So I thought this work was really, really stunning. And also it was the first work that you would see at the entrance of the exhibition. So it was really a showstopper. Also really, really not fun to install and uninstall, because I have no idea how many lines of nylon it took. It was a lot. All right, and here I just wanted to show you what we did in terms of the signage. For me, it was important to present the text both in Papiamento and in English, because I feel that if you want to bridge a gap between the community and contemporary art, you start by really developing a vocabulary in the local language. So we tried to do that. The works had their usual tags, and we also had some text, again, in both Papiamento and English, giving more context on the works and how it related to the exhibition. And also we tried, since we're talking about concepts like the other and representation, for some of us it's very much a familiar term, so it's not that difficult to use them in our discourse, but some other people maybe are not familiar with the terms themselves. So it was really an opportunity to also provide this context for some of the audience members. All right, so our third took place, I think, around March and April this year. It was Terra Soil, and it was a duo show of Olga Gabriel and Jess Wolf. And the theme of this exhibition was how artists, in this context, Aruba as a medium and as a source of a stage for their research on identity, their search for who they are and where this comes from. And we selected these two artists because they deal with the same topics, but from very different perspectives. Their aesthetic is quite different. And you will maybe see why in a second. So this is Jess Wolf, and she considers herself an artist and an artisan. She specializes in textile sculptures and wearable art. And she always plays with that fine line of when something is fine art and when something is craft. And she really uses that to investigate, for example, things such as her Caribbean roots, rituals, the psychological mood. So it's really for her a space where she can really submerge herself and not only find answers, but mostly develop new questions around like her artistic practice. And then we have Olga Gabriel. Olga Gabriel has a background in the performing arts, so she really infuses this in her works, bringing things such as the mise en scène and the importance of color and sound, powerful gestures, and really busy with, for example, taking a closer look at the human condition and the spaces, physical and imaginary, that we. So these were two artists that were going into the landscape in a way to get the materials that they needed, maybe tangible or intangible, and to include them in their artistic discourse. And for example, Jazz goes into the landscape to literally find found objects and include them in the work, or use nature as new or develop new materials. And for Olga, the landscape became, in a way, sort of podium or a space where she could just do her performances, sometimes site specific, and eventually she developed or even more towards video works. So this is the layout of the exhibition. And to give you an idea of how it looked like, so this is a view from the entrance to the back. And then here you see some works by Olga on the wall, and Grito Balama by Jess on the left. Here you go. This is from the back to the front. So as you can see, well, by coincidence, there was also this kind of harmony between the colors that both artists used. This was really something not planned, but it ended up looking really, really nice. And the idea was for not only for the artists to go into a dialogue with each other, but also for the works to, or for the audience to find like these different tensions and points of similarities or even discrepancies between the works and what the works were trying to address. Is a shot from a work from Jess called Unoka Research. Thank you. So Unoka Research was Jess's search for new materials, as I mentioned before, in the Arubian landscape. And what you see at the background is a photo of a piece of work, techniques that she 2 years plus research. So I wanted to talk very briefly about two of these works. So this is from Olga and this is from Jess, just to get more in depth into the themes or the concepts of each of the works. This is very, for that point in Olga's career, it was very different from what we were used to. If you talked about Olga's work, it was mostly like these beautiful videos in the rough side, the North Shore of Aruba, for example, or pictures of her site-specific performances. So this was really something that a lot of people didn't expect. It's what you see is just a simple white textile with a very. This work is called Migration, and it was a theory on the most basic mechanism for the development of each of our cultures, right, which is human mobility. This was a very interesting work because we put it at the entrance of the space, and if you didn't give the audience or the visitor a context, I would say like at the time the first reaction was not positive, so they would really take it as a Aruba itself. But then when you explained a bit more about the fact that, I mean, we all migrate at some point, and throughout history, all of us, we move from one point out to the other because we're hoping that wherever we're going, right, is better. So this is like the most basic civilizations going through time, and then once you see shift in that reasoning in this viewer, that's their face is a poem. It's really something. And then this work is called Grito Baulama. This is from Jess Wolf. About La Baulama, sorry, translate roughly to Scream Underwater. This is the second version of a work that she actually showed at the Mykonos Biennial last year with the group of Atelier. And what you of mangroves she collected at Savaneta, which is a very special place for her because in her childhood she used to spend a lot of time there. So she pieces of mangrove and she intervened them with different techniques like embroidery and sewing, textiles, and the result is really like this floating entity that is supposed to show this tension that we have within our communities when we really avoid talking about important issues such as, I don't know, mental health or child abuse or alcoholism. It's really something that it's an uncomfortable conversation, and once you keep on bottling that up, it creates this tension that it becomes unsustainable at some point. So something else that was really nice when we were work that was accidental was that you can see the reflection or the shadows actually from these mangroves on the podium, and nice atmosphere of being like under or submerged when you were around this sculpture. And also very briefly, so we did the basic introduction text at the beginning, the tags for the works. And for this exhibition, I really didn't want to fill up the walls with more explanation on the work. So we were trying to do it with a handout, but due to some small logistics, we didn't manage to have it on time. and it was still an interesting way to see how people really just found those without having to give them too much context, and just with the basic framework of the introduction text and the connotations of the title and the titles of the works. It really did work very well. And then lastly, for tonight, I wanted to talk about Tropico Cube, which was the last exhibition, the ones that you visited yesterday, by Laura de Vogel. This is Laura. Laura, she says she works with different medium, but for me, the predominant medium for her is space. She's always very curious to what a particular context, how it conditions you, how you occupy the space, be it tangible or just ideologically. So when we were talking about developing a solo show, we always came back to this research that she mentioned yesterday about actually use these presentation mechanisms to legitimize, right? So if you're maybe a Caribbean artist and you're exhibited in a wide cube space, chances are that most of the time you will be taken more seriously. And this is not necessarily the most effective or healthy or more engaging way of presenting your work, because sometimes it's just a matter of you're extracting it from their context. So Laura was really interested in playing with, the contrast between this clinicalness and just like emptiness of the white spaces, and actually contrast them with something more textural, like what you saw yesterday, which space, the cacti, the sandbox. So this is the floor plan, and I wanted to show you what the initial plan, because we also mentioned that the space was supposed to be a lot bigger. And on both sides, we were supposed to have the scaffolding. I think the ceiling of the space is like 5 meters long, so it was almost to the ceiling. But due to production or logistic, couldn't really develop the space as big as she wanted. And also, we were a bit afraid that it would become very claustrophobic because the space already is quite small. So to fill that as well with works, maybe it wasn't ideal. And then in the end, the 3 walls and the floor. And then the scaffolding, we talked about this yesterday as well. Initially was supposed to be the way to support the structure, but in the end, it also added like other layers to the concept of this space. What's very interesting was that observation that it's really holding on to nothing. And if you see this cube as a commentary on the cultural structure, infrastructure that we cultural professionals work with here on Aruba, there are initiatives that are trying to do some things, but we're still an unsustainable cultural sector for the most of us. So it could also be read as that kind of reflection. And then this is the other side. And one of the things that was also very interesting for me curating this specific show was that Laura was already intervening in the space. So I didn't want to, if I didn't have something to as an input that would really reinforce that concept, to just not intervene at all. So we kind of split let's say the interventions into what you see on the walls, which is these kind of text, where I just really touched very precisely on specific moments of the development of the white cube, and then kept it at that, because I thought like that was the only way that it could force for the audience members that are not so familiar with the specifics of what a white cube is, that it could actually feed onto the concept of Laura. And then you have this wall where the tie-dye paintings, which originally we had planned on putting in the space itself, but of course that was not gonna work. And in the end, we settled with this setup that also echoes the Paris Salon kind of way of presenting art back in the day. So that was really also a very beautiful presentation. And then you have here the inside of the space with the projection of the tranquera and her research and her drawings. And yeah, as I said, we kept it also very simple. We didn't do any kind of tags for the works because, again, it was to see, okay, what was it necessary to give each of these pieces a title, or was it not more about the space and how we just inhabited the space and walk through it, or the connections that we were trying to find between the components in the exhibition? And that's it, actually. I don't know if it's been more than 30 minutes, but if you have questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Anna Maria. It's really inspiring to see that the work you're doing with these incredible urban artists. And if anybody has questions for Anna Maria, any questions?
Worse when it's showing it smaller. So when you see the pictures, the floor influence all the pictures,
Yeah.
all the artworks. So whatever you do to the floor thing,
Yeah.
even when you are accustomed, we are accustomed to it. So when we walk in, we won't see it like you see it. Influence every single work you put in it.
Yeah.
And hopefully in the future you can solve that.
We'll see.
You have to break it all.
We
It
did
costs a lot of
think about
money.
it, but I mean, not to break it, but to cover it with something, but it's
Yeah, you can cover it. There,
Yeah.
Dominicans are specialists in that. So
keep it in
the
mind for the
Dominican
next one.
Republic has their museums all done again, overdone again, and they are specialists in floors. I saw the most beautiful things they have done with it. So hopefully you can, because it's terrible.
It
No
really,
matter what
yeah,
you do.
it really influences
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. That could also be a solution.
I had a question that I guess is sort of in the same vein about working in these different spaces and with different organizations or institutions. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about the collaboration with Casti Cultura, how they approached you and like how that kind of the relationship was and how open they were to the exhibitions you were putting on and how they were looking to expand their reach into visual arts and culture as well.
Good question. Well, they, as I mentioned before, they had been doing these exhibitions, but there weren't that structured in the sense that they didn't necessarily have a curatorial intervention. So it was mostly that the artists themselves would approach Casi Cultura and they would find the budget to do the work. So this was the first time that they actually wanted to do it as a serial, and they found the budget. And we had, for example, if you notice the branding, that was something that was very important for me to include in this specific program. It's a very small team. The budget wasn't that big, but at least we managed to pay the artist an artist fee, and also separately they had material budget for the materials. So that was also something that was new. But mostly it was us sharing the technical team with the rest of the operations in Casi Cultura. So sometimes something that could be done in less than a week would take us 2 weeks because they really had to, switch from side to side. So we're super grateful that they really put all the effort, and that we managed to open all the exhibitions on time. That was really nerve-wracking. But yeah, I mean, I was hired for this series. I don't know if they're planning on continuing later, because I do know that the workload was more than they had anticipated, for example, in terms of the promotion and all of this. And yeah, so I am not sure how they will continue in the future, but I do know that they are very much interested in being one of the centers of presentation of contemporary art, so that they can expand their influence or their impact, let's say, in the cultural sector in Aruba.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions?
Since this was a different approach to the space and how the exhibitions are done, what was how did the public receive this, and do you see like a difference between before and now?
Mostly during the openings, we could really see I remember distinctly at the first exhibition, it was really entering something completely different, only because we changed the color of the walls, but it really did change the mood of the space. I think that, again, this was the first time that they were really approaching it, for example, with introduction text that really, I mean, they did have like the biographies of the artists and such, but to actually have somebody really contextualize what they were looking at. That was one of the first times that they did that outside of the program. And personally, I did get good feedback that it was helpful, specifically with the more conceptual pieces that we presented. Sometimes we forget that, of course, this is something that we live and breathe. But things so simple as what a white cube is, you know, if you want to reach a wider audience, you have to find that balance, right? And that's why I didn't want to rely too much on the text, because so people don't read as much as we would want to, as in the space. That was really funny because people would approach me with a question that was literally in the introduction, and so it's very curious to see like how much use they actually have for the text. But yeah, but in general, it was they were happy with the fact that it looked like it was something taken care of in the specific space, and that you could see that they all the exhibitions had a theme. We always tried, and specifically with the branding, to give each exhibition a new face, you know. So we chose per exhibition one specific color that we continue throughout the period of the program. So of course, what I did notice was that, and this is not I'm not reinventing water. You need very aggressive marketing to get people to come to these spaces, and that was a pity because we did have the materials, but sometimes it's just you really have to be extremely aggressive for it. And you would invite the press, and not every time they would show up, or they would actually listen to what you were saying. So sometimes it didn't really translate 100% how we wanted to. But it's for me, and it was an experiment to really try to have the freedom to just experiment with different ways of getting the audience in. But definitely, if they do it in a second time, they should really go way like 200% more aggressive with the marketing. I think that would help.
I was curious also in terms of the audience, how you saw, like, besides the, let's say, outreach and bringing other audiences to visit the exhibition, whether you were able to observe the interaction that the Casa de Cultura communities would have with the exhibition, given that it's like different disciplines, that there's the school and intergenerational, probably, audience, and like whether you saw that, like, not necessarily the contemporary art visitors, but others, and whether you saw any interesting experiences and dialogues happening, interesting for you and for them, of course.
Definitely. I mean, during the day, especially after school hours, you always had these kids that would, they were waiting for their parents to come and pick them up. And they were always very curious as to what was happening in the space. So that was something that was really nice to see. Sometimes you have this girl that's playing piano, and then it's silence, and she was just in the space walking around. And also, Casa de Cultura really tried to combine other events with the exhibition. So they would make sure that they would advertise that, you know, if you're coming for a concert, there's also this exhibition available. And most of the times they would definitely go in. But since the shows were open during work hours, I wasn't there the whole time to actually measure all the interactions and the amount of people that visited. But I do know that this there was a curiosity, because you would see that something else was in the space, and that's also why I really tried to move just using the walls, but just really the space itself, because then, you know, with installations such as the one I showed of Velvet, I mean, it's something that you just walk by and you're like, what is that? And you have to go in. So I think that yeah, it's if they continue with that kind of combination and using other opportunities to bring the audience into the space. Definitely you have like these kind of moments where a person that is not used to contemporary art or would go as a source of let's say recreation in their leisure time, definitely they do it and they go out of it like with an experience of I was not expecting this, and they would definitely come back. I did notice that at some point there was one lady that just randomly walked in the room where we were doing a tour, and she just joined. And then we saw her the next exhibition as well for the opening. So at least she came back once. So these moments are very, they're scarce, but they are very nice to witness.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Anna Maria? So I think we'll take a short break, and we'll be back soon with our second speaker for the night, our curator in residence, Sofia Olascoaga, and we're very excited to introduce her soon. So tune back in shortly. Thank you.
Ask me why I fight back.